An important case to consider is the case number 2 in your textbook, Johnson versus the Transportation Agency. It talks about our affirmative action plans and our voluntary affirmative action plans. They should not trammel on the rights of majority workers. So we don't want a situation where we are punishing workers who are in the majority groups, and we don't want to be removing them, letting them go, discriminating against them. They have jobs and they have seniority. That's important, right? We do not want to set aside positions for women and minorities to meet a quota, because again, quotas are illegal, not only according to the Bakke case, but also according to the Civil Rights Act of 91. We also want to make sure our plans are temporary so that when a goal is reached, the plan ends. The goal is to maintain, of course, our diversity, but once you've engaged in diverse hiring and you have reached your goals, you've built a good practice. And so very likely you may choose to continue to be proactive in your recruiting, but there's less pressure and you don't have to have a specific plan addressing and meeting those goals. And you want cause only minimal intrusion into a legitimate settled expectation of other employees. So you don't want to, upset the apple cart. You don't want to throw things into disarray. The goal here is we want to have a very clear plan in place, that it's very incremental in terms of improving things for our organization. And we don't want to intrude on their expected roles, expected policies, expected seniority, and all those sorts of things as they're laid out. Next, the concept of reverse discrimination. As I said, I am not fond of that terminology, although it tends to be used in some of the courts. And what it basically means is a majority group member feels that they were adversely affected by the use of an employer's affirmative action plan. And Weber versus the Steelworkers case, I think it's listed in your book, is a great example of that. And reverse discrimination only represent about 3% of your EEOC cases. So it's not often that a reverse discrimination case is brought and is legitimate. However, there are certainly circumstances where that occurs, specifically where we are proactively hurting a majority group member, in lieu of instituting an affirmative action plan. The bottom line is discrimination is discrimination. You're either using race and sex and things like that to make a decision about who you want to hire, or you don't, and it's inappropriate to do so. So that's why I don't really like the term reverse discrimination, but it simply just implies that a majority group member is making the complaint and not a minority group member, as it works. Affirmative action really aligns with the idea that organizations should value diversity and multiculturalism. The U.S. Department of Labor's Workforce 2000 study, which was initially conducted by the Hudson Institute, they said that they noticed 85% of the net growth of the workforce is going to be comprised of women and non-Europeans, meaning non-white individuals. And so if our growth opportunities in the workforce are going to be with non-white groups, particularly non-white males, we do need to consider how we're going to improve the diversity in our organizations so that it's not just an organization made up of white males, but in fact is made up of people that represent the area in which you live and work and interact. So valuing diversity is key. Inclusion is key. Diversity is the demographic makeup of your workplace, and it's not just based on, in the way I think about diversity, it's not just based on race and sex and color and things like that. It can also be diversity of experiences and diversity of positions that people have held and diversity of ideas and ways that they go about and problem solve. I look at a wide net when I think about diversity and multiculturalism. From the perspective of the law cares more about underrepresented demographic groups that have historically been discriminated against. But when we speak of the concept of diversity-related issues, diversity does include a broader net of categories. And so we have to learn to understand and accept that differences are good, that diversity has value to organizations, and to appreciate that differences give us different opportunities, different ideas, different incentives, right, in order to learn and grow in our organization. If we don't value diversity, we're going to become homogeneous. We're going to become have greater difficulties in competing in the marketplace, because more diverse companies are more agile, they're more flexible, they're more adaptable, and they're better able to make decisions on the fly when they need creative solutions to problems. Inclusion is how we make sure that we are including people in the essential work of the company. So when we think about inclusion, it's not just having somebody in your company, like, oh, I've got my token woman or my token black person or my token Latino working for me, but that they are an integral part of that company, that they are making contributions, that we accept their contributions. Because attracting diverse people is not as problematic as retaining diverse people. If diverse people don't feel like their ideas matter, if their opinions matter, if their points of view have any value, if they are continually marginalized and othered in the organization, you're going to find you won't be able to keep them, that they're going to leave. So it is important when we think about multiculturalism and diversity and things like that, that we absolutely make sure that we engage in activities and behaviors that not only bring people to the table, but they are an active participant at the table. For those of you that have taken my MBA 522 class, and I think there are a few of you that may have taken this, you will note that I used this graphic, Exhibit 5.14, to illustrate the difference between something that is equal versus something that is equitable. And the terminology is really getting at, are things the same, or are they fair based on what people can and can't do? And the goal is, of course, how do we remove barriers so that it is good for everybody, right? So your first image on the left is about equality, and it assumes everybody gets the same thing. Now, equality assumes everybody's at the same level playing field. Everybody's got the same opportunities, the same experiences, and that it's just not true. There's plenty of evidence out there that equality it just doesn't exist. In terms of everybody having the same experiences and the same opportunities. We know some schools don't have advanced placement classes. Some schools don't have a lot of diversity and opportunities for taking good, solid STEM classes. They don't have opportunities to do science fairs and things like that. And so we can't assume that those people have the same education as richer schools that have a lot more resources and opportunities available to them. So equality, while it sounds really good, we can't really treat everybody the same all the time because not everybody's at the same place, right? As you can see from the image on the left. Now the image in the middle is getting at equity, what is fair. And we give everybody equal access. And so if everybody needs to be able to have access, we sometimes have to lift up those who do not have the same opportunities. All right. And then the one on the right is about removing the barriers. And that's really our goal. Our goal is to remove barriers entirely. Instead of having a wooden fence up, right, we put a chain link fence so people can see through it. And it doesn't matter whether or not you're tall or short or what have you, everybody can see the game, everybody can participate, everybody can do that. So the goal now is not necessarily fairness, because we can get to fairness to some extent. But if we can remove the barriers, then we don't have to worry about it. Then we can make sure that everybody gets the same opportunities in that matter. So we have to figure out where the systematic barriers are for people in our company and remove those barriers. That's the goal. And that's what glass ceiling work is about. That's what a lot of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion work is about, is not just making sure it's fair for everybody and giving people boosts where they need to be, but how do we get rid of the systematic institutional barriers that are in place that stop people from being able to advance. And lastly, our management tips. Number 1, practice prevention. Make sure your hiring, promotion, and training processes are open and available for everybody to be able to engage and to practice and to have opportunities. If we don't allow everybody to have the equal opportunity access to hiring, training, and promotion, we're going to create barriers and problems. Number 2, know your workforce. So you should know whether or not there is an imbalance, right? And whether or not you have underrepresentation in your workplace. So work with your stakeholders, work with the local labor markets, work with local schools, do voluntary affirmative action programs to remedy these issues before the courts order you to do it, or whether you have a contract issue that requires you to do it. Number 3, ensure that voluntary affirmative action programs comply with judicial requirements. So making sure that we're not putting an undue burden on our majority groups and making them feel like they are not contributing. We want to provide training regarding our affirmative action plan, including a senior management commitment to doing affirmative action and being affirmative and proactive in recruiting diverse people. We want to drive diversity, equity, and inclusion into corporate culture through sustained emphasis on HR activities. That's where the DEI work is, right? In the HR activities, where we have to make sure we attract and retain people. Again, we can attract people, but if we can't keep them, that's a problem for us. We want to make sure that we are fair in terms of how we compensate people, and we provide equal opportunity for development opportunities. So there's a whole host of different things that we can do to get us to that place. So our job as in HR and our job as managers is to make sure that we're removing those barriers so that everybody has access to opportunities in the workplace. That's the goal of affirmative action. It's to remove the barriers and to ensure that we're providing opportunities for everybody to compete. If we remove those barriers, they can compete on their own merits, and the best person gets the job.